Great Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Om Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Astotara Satta Shri Srimad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jai.
Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki
Jai.
Nam Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai.
Jai.
Prem Sikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki
Jai.
Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopal Gopinath Shamakund Radha Kund Giri Govardhan Ki
Jai.
Vrindavan Dham Ki
Jai.
Mayapur Navadvip Dham
Jai.
Gangamai Yamunamai
Jai.
Bhakti Devi Tulsi Maharani Ki
Jai.
Samaved Bhakta Vrinda Ki
Jai.
Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the lotus feet of Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga.
Hare Bo.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Hare Krishna. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today we continue our study of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are in the third canto, chapter 20. Today's verse is number 43. Ta'atma sargam tam kayam pitara pratipedire sadyebhyascha pitribhyascha kavayo yad vitanvate. Ta'atma sargam tam kayam pitara pratipedire sadhyebhyascha pitribhyascha kavayo yat vitanvate. Ta'atma sargam tam kayam pitara pratipedire sadyebhyascha pitribhyascha kavayo yad vitanvate. Please chant.
Krishna. Atma sargam tam kayam pitara pratipidare Shadhe bhayascha pitabhascha bhayascha kabayo yad bhitan bhate. Hare Krishna.
Atmasargam tam kayam pitara pratipedare sadhyebhyascha pitrubhyascha kavayo yad vitanvate. Hare Krishna.
Anyone else? They. Atmasargam, source of their existence. Tam, that. Kayam, body. Pitaraha, the pitas. Pratipedire, accepted. Sadyebhyaha, to the Sadyas, Cha, and Pitribhya to the Pitas, Cha also. Kavayaha, those well versed in rituals, Yat, through which Vitanvite offer oblations. Translation by Abhayacharya Vinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The Pitas themselves took possession of the invisible body, the source of their existence. It is through the medium of this invisible body that those well versed in the rituals offer oblations to the Sadyas and Pitas in the form of their departed ancestors on the occasion of Shraddha. I should have pointed out before reading this translation, in this section we're reading about how Lord Brahma, as his doing his part in secondary creation, in this section he's creating various different types of beings, and then after he creates these types of beings from certain mentalities, he then gives up that particular, he casts off that mentality or that body, and then these different living entities take shelter of that body. So here in the form of the Pittas, this is a subtle body that then these Pittas and Sadyas are able to take shelter of. Purport. Shraddha is a ritualistic performance observed by the followers of the Vedas. There is a yearly occasion of 15 days when ritualistic religionists follow the principle of offering oblations to departed souls. Thus, those fathers and ancestors who, by freaks of nature, might not have a gross body for material enjoyment, can again gain such bodies due to the offering of Shraddha oblations by their descendants. The performance of Shraddha, or offering oblations with prasad, is still current in India, especially at Gaya, where oblations are offered at the lotus feet of Vishnu in a celebrated temple. Because the Lord is thus pleased with the devotional service of the descendants, by his grace he liberates the condemned souls of forefathers who do not have gross bodies, and he favors them to again receive a gross body for development of spiritual advancement. Unfortunately, by the influence of Maya, the conditioned soul employs the body he gets for sense gratification, forgetting that such an occupation may lead him to return to an invisible body. The devotee of the Lord, or one who is in Krishna consciousness, however, does not need to perform such ritualistic ceremonies as Shraddha, because he is always pleasing the Supreme Lord. Therefore, his fathers and ancestors, who might have been in difficulty, are automatically relieved. The vivid example is Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad Maharaj requested Lord Nrsimhadev to deliver his sinful father, who had so many times offended the lotus feet of the Lord. The Lord replied that in a family where a Vaishnava like Prahlad is born, not only his father, but his father's father and their fathers up to the 14th father back are all automatically delivered. The conclusion, therefore, is that Krishna consciousness is the sum total of all good work for the family, for society, and for all living entities. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the author says that a person fully conversant with Krishna consciousness does not perform any rituals because he knows that simply by serving Krishna in full Krishna consciousness, all rituals are automatically performed. Translation again. The Pitas themselves took possession of the invisible body, the source of their existence. It is through the medium of this invisible body that those well versed in the rituals offer oblations to the sadyas and pitas in the form of their departed ancestors on the occasion of Shraddha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Tanamane Namaste Sarasvate Devi Gauravani Vicharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschati Deshatarne Om Ajnana Timirandasya Ganjana Shalakaya Chakshur and Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Vanchakalpatrubhyas Chakrapa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. Okay, so today we're actually going to talk about debts. Today's verse and purport, of course, talks about the debts that ritualistic religionists have to their forefathers. We read about why they have the debt, what they do to pay that debt, offer oblations yearly for 15 days. The result of what happens when they successfully pay that debt, their ancestors who are trapped in subtle bodies, they again get a gross body. And the likely scenario that happens after that debt has been resolved. Unfortunately, those living entities again commit the same mistakes, and the cycle continues. We also read, of course, about how a pure devotee doesn't have to worry about such debts, since if the Supreme Lord is pleased, right? Because it was mentioned that when these ritualistic religionists are performing these oblations, especially at Gaya, especially at that particular Vishnu temple, Lord Vishnu is pleased. And as a result of his being pleased, he delivers these entrapped pitas from their subtle cages, and meaning they're still in the subtle bodies, but now they also have a gross body to interact with the gross elements. And so, unfortunately, most of the time, the same mistakes are made, and then this just becomes a perpetual cycle. So it's a duty of the ritualistic religionists to perform this service, because again, this mistake keeps happening. So the younger generation should help bring the forefathers back to the plane of existence where they can utilize their senses, their gross body, and try again. But as we read, that when one is a pure devotee, one doesn't have to worry about any of these rituals, because they're already pleasing Lord Vishnu. Right, so all debts are resolved. And regarding the specific debt being discussed in today's verse and purport, the forefathers for 14 generations are actually delivered. Right. As mentioned in the first paragraph of today's purport, this liberation that Lord Vishnu gives to these departed souls, it just means that they're liberated from strictly being bound to the subtle body. They're able to then again have a gross body. But that's what that liberation means. It doesn't mean that they go back home, back to Godhead. It means they're liberated from exclusively being bound to just a subtle body, and they're again given a gross body, as was explained in the purport. Being trapped in a subtle body, just a subtle body, it's extremely frustrating. Imagine having all these desires, but not being able to act on any of them. Can be very frustrating. Those of us who are advancing in age, or whose gross bodies are deteriorating or becoming more and more limited in various ways, we have a small taste of what that's like. We see the need for something to happen, to get done, uh, and we have knowledge of how to do it. And when we were younger, we were able to do it in no time at all. Uh, uh, but we no longer have the ability to physically accomplish it. It's frustrating. Uh, but just having a subtle body, and that's it. That's got to be far more frustrating, as one can imagine. So it's not a good position to be in, right? So that liberation from just being trapped in that subtle body, and then again getting a gross body, uh, that is offered as the result of the Shraddha ceremony, um, is just that liberation from that particular bondage. Then these forefathers again have a gross body, and with it they have a valuable opportunity to take spiritual advancement seriously. But unfortunately, even having gone through that torturous situation, as one can imagine, and being freed from it by the mercy of others, the descendants having done their duty, freed them from their bondage. But again, people will generally tend, even after going through all of that trouble, people tend to make those same mistakes again, and thus they get stuck in that perpetual cycle. Now, although most of us were not born into ritualistic religious families, we still have some debts, right? We hear about these debts throughout the Shastra. So in Srimad Bhagavatam and elsewhere, we learn that anyone who comes from a twice-born family, they are born with three debts: a debt to the sages, a debt to the devatas, and a debt to the forefathers. Those debts are resolved respectively by celibacy, sacrifice, and procreation. Most of us aren't born to twice-born families, so we don't tend to pay much attention to these three debts. But in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, we learn that all of us, no matter what kind of family we take birth in, have several debts. Anytime we depend on anyone for anything, whether we actually realize it or not, actually meaning whether we realize we're depending on someone or not, a debt is actually incurred. So we have debts to parents, teachers, anyone who's ever fed us, cows actually, that we drink their milk. And of course, the sages, the demigods, and the other forefathers as well, not just the parents. So everyone actually has these debts. But there, in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, again, it's mentioned, just like in today's purport, that if one is completely engaged in the Lord's devotional service, then he's absolved of all debts. So, no worries, right? There's also this famous quote from Srimad Bhagavatam in the 11th canto, 5th chapter, verse 41. It says that one who has given up all material duties and taken full shelter at the lotus feet of Mukunda, who gives shelter to all, is not indebted to the demigods, the great sages, the ordinary living beings, relatives, friends, mankind, or even his forefathers who have passed away. Right? All of this is taken care of because one has pleased Vishnu. So many aspiring devotees don't feel that they have any debts to anyone. Right? We just consider it's all taken care of. If someone were to come up to us and say, hey, have you repaid your debt to society or this or that or the other thing, we'd say, no, that's all taken care of. Check again. Yeah, I've got to be on that list. Just let me through. But if we pay attention, there are a few very important operative words in the above quotes that we read that we tend to overlook or ignore, but which are actually quite important for us to pay attention to and be aware of. So in today's purport, it was said that a Vaishnava like Prahlad, and a person who is fully conversant with Krishna consciousness, right? They're relieved from these debts. In the quote from Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, it said, completely engaged in the Lord's service, right? Those who are completely, fully, 24 hours, 7 days a week, unceasingly engaged, completely, right? And then in Srimad Bhagavatam 11.541, the last quote we read, that qualifier is one who has given up all material duties and taken full shelter at the lotus feet of Mukunda, right? So the idea is that it's not just if we're paying lip service to Lord Vishnu, then we don't have any duties to fulfill. It's if we're no longer engaging in anything material, we're only engaging in spiritual matters, then that's when we no longer have any debts. And that's why there are no longer any debts, because we're no longer interacting with material nature. Therefore, there's no debts. If we are still dealing with material nature, which I think all of us will admit we are, then there's still some debts that are holding us back. So if we don't meet this criteria, completely engaged in the Lord's service, given up all material duties, taken full shelter of Mukunda, if we're not Vaishnavas like Prahlad, then we have more debts than we could possibly imagine how to even start repaying, right? Because we rely on so many things that we don't even realize we're relying on. There's so many things that are happening behind the scenes that we're just completely oblivious to, and we absolutely depend on them, or they assist in our daily lives. And each of these things, even though we don't necessarily know about them, require a payment, right? One can say that there are a lot of hidden fees when coming to this material world. And this can sound pretty daunting, but don't worry, there's a solution, right? Sure, we're not pure devotees, so it's not that our entire debts have been completely erased, but there is still a solution. All right. So I imagine that most of you on here know that there is this thing where if someone gets in debt over their head and can't possibly figure out a way to get out from under that debt, even if they work 6 full-time jobs for the rest of their lives, there's just no way that they're ever going to be able to pay all of the debts that they incurred. There's this thing where they can consolidate all of these various different separate debts into one manageable monthly payment, right? There are these programs that do this. And so there's a similar way for us to clear ourselves of our countless unpayable debts by just focusing on one manageable debt that we can actually do something about. So although we're not Vaishnavas like Prahlad, we're not pure devotees who are fully conversant with Krishna consciousness and have not given up all material duties and taken full shelter of Lord Mukunda, we do all have the great fortune of coming in contact with, whether it was directly or indirectly, with someone who does fit this description, and that's our Srila Prabhupada. So even though most of us weren't born into pure Krishna consciousness, we certainly now are part of the family, and thus we owe it to Srila Prabhupada to be proper representatives of his movement, right? So if we take that debt, our debt to Srila Prabhupada, if we take that seriously, and we put our most sincere endeavor into following the process that he so kindly laid out for us, gradually but consistently, we will become purified. So we will become more pure. We will continually become more conversant with Krishna consciousness. We're not fully conversant yet, but as time goes on, we should become more conversant. We're not pure devotees yet, but we should be becoming gradually purified. And as we become purified and more conversant with Krishna consciousness, then progressively we will give up our material duties while relying more and more on the shelter of Lord Mukunda. Then all other debts will be erased by his mercy. But, and this is a very extremely important but, if we, like the Pitas mentioned in today's purport, simply just attempt to reap the benefits of Srila Prabhupada's sacrifice, but fail to learn from our previous mistakes, and again become distracted by sense gratification and other material pursuits, we will never be relieved of our debts. Right? If we don't take it seriously, and if we don't try to live up to the position that we have had the opportunity of getting as followers of Srila Prabhupada, then we're just squandering a very valuable opportunity, and we will continue to be burdened by these debts, right? So we have to take this duty, this debt very seriously, right? It's actually the only thing of true importance in our lives, right? Anything that's not connected with the process of awakening our Krishna consciousness is detrimental and will lead to perpetual struggles. This is where all of our time, all of our energy, all of our resources should be spent in cultivating Krishna consciousness. Because we know this. We know that any material pursuit is going to lead to a temporary result, right? We are eternal beings. We're trapped in a temporary situation. So although we certainly have relationships that we hold dear, that are related to our external bodies, and although we can certainly engage in those relationships in a favorable way in Krishna consciousness, if we fail to do that, if we're just focused on the external and we're not actually addressing the underlying spiritual principle, then we're not actually paying any of these debts. We're not even acknowledging any of them generally. But they are there, whether we know it or not, right? So the only thing that actually has importance in our life is cultivating this spiritual understanding. So all relationships, all situations, all circumstances, all places, people, things that surround us, we should be sure that we're viewing all of these things as Krishna's energy, Krishna's potency, and we should be using all of these things accordingly so that we can have a spiritual awakening. So whatever level of Krishna consciousness we're on currently, it is our duty to continuously increase that by engaging in sadhu sangha, following the instructions of the spiritual master, severing our connections to the anarthas that are holding us back, becoming consistently more steady in our spiritual practice. Of course, chanting the holy name while avoiding offenses, that's going to help with all of this. And if we do this with sincerity, we will be able to distinguish reality from illusion, and a taste will develop so that we will actually have a spontaneous attachment to Krishna, and then that will blossom into pure love. But it all starts with us taking this debt to Srila Prabhupada seriously in whatever way we can currently, and then gradually increasing our sincerity and taking that debt more and more seriously as time goes on. So it's not that we should just feel like we stumbled upon a windfall, and just imagine that, okay, yeah, that's it. We're liberated. Our family's liberated back to 14 generations. Everything's taken care of. That can become true if we take this process very seriously. But as it stands now, if we're not taking the process seriously, meaning seriously to the point that it is the only thing we're taking seriously, nothing else matters at all. If that's not where we're at yet, which, as I mentioned, I don't think any of us would claim that that is where we are at. Then we still have some work to do. And so we should make sure that we're not ignoring this particular debt that we have to Srila Prabhupada and his followers. Okay, that is where we will stop for today. Are there any questions, comments, or discussions? Dronacharya Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Charachandra Prabhu, for this class. It's a topic that comes up very frequently, especially among a congregation that is majority Indian, that is, aware of these customs. And then you have part of the congregation who is, not born in India, not familiar with these customs, like you and myself, that, we have no idea about these debts, or, it's, somebody leaves their body, you feel bad for a couple of days, they get buried or cremated, and, life kind of moves on. And I guess navigating around this process in Krishna consciousness and how we approach it. As you mentioned, if you're on the pure devotional platform, then you don't have them. But oftentimes we find ourselves kind of in this middle place where we're working toward that goal. And I guess that's where it kind of lies of, should those, you made it clear that our debt is to Srila Prabhupada, and the previous acharyas. Still there's, I think, a caution maybe, or I want to cover all my bases to do these, Shraddha ceremonies. And temples are sometimes approached, like, do you have somebody that can perform a Shraddha ceremony? It's always like this awkward kind of feeling of, sometimes the pujaris don't want to do it because they kind of claim it to be a karmakanda activity, and they don't want to be engaged in it. Some may do it. It's just kind of this like gray area, like should we be involved in these activities? Then the argument's made with Lord Chaitanya when he met his spiritual master. He went to Gaya to do this. So could it be an opportunity to preach and awaken people to Krishna consciousness? They're at a vulnerable place in life, just lost a loved one. This may be an opportunity to preach about Krishna consciousness. So you have any suggestions on how to approach?
Yes, absolutely. Very important question. Because it's not that. So, as I was mentioning, our most important debt is to Srila Prabhupada, and the reason that's the focus is, as I mentioned, I myself, I don't even realize all of the different debts I have, right? But anyone that's ever helped us, we're indebted to, right? So that means, let alone when after the, first of all, let alone, most kids these days don't even take care of their parents, let alone grandparents and great grandparents like that. Culturally, it's just not something that people think is important for whatever reason. And then let alone after they die, even when they're living,
Mhm.
right? Kids, when their parents become invalid, generally these days, the kids aren't willing to take them in,
Yes.
even though when they were children, they
Yes.
couldn't walk, they couldn't eat. The parents were feeding them, they're carrying them around, and now the tables have turned, and the kids are like, Whatever, not my problem. You should have worked harder and saved up for a better retirement so that you could stay in some sort of facility where, no one even knows you, but and they're feeding you all sorts of nonsense. And anyway, this is how things are going these days. But as since we do understand that we have a debt to Srila Prabhupada and we are becoming purified, we start to actually understand what some of these other debts are, right? To our parents, to anyone that's ever fed us, to the cows, for example, and keep going. And so if we see these debts in relation to our debt to our spiritual master, and our process, then those debts are also all worth paying if it's in context with this original debt, because we know that pleasing Vishnu is what is actually clearing the debts, right? But if we're doing that, that's why the loving exchanges between the Vaishnavas are also there, right? So more directly toward your question, if a congregation member who actually grew up in a ritualistic religious family, and they want this to be performed, and they go to the ISKCON temple and say, hey, can you perform this ritual for me? Then, of course, we can know that most people that do this do it for karmakanda reasons. But since they happen to come to the ISKCON temple, that means Krishna has made some arrangement. It can be done in such a way that the person's focus goes more from this, I'm just doing this out of my birthright duty. We can help shift that consciousness more from just doing it like that and doing it actually for the purpose of pleasing Lord Vishnu, which is the whole point, right? So we can actually use that, as you mentioned, as a preaching opportunity, and anything can be used as a preaching opportunity. So if we live in the temple, anyone that walks in that door, for whatever reason, we should understand that something has caused them to walk in that door. They have approached Krishna, right? Srimad Bhagavatam says that whether we have no desires at all, or we're completely full of desires, or we desire liberation, we should approach Krishna. That's what we should do. So even if we're full of desire, sarvakama, we should still be approaching Krishna. So if someone's approaching us as representatives of Srila Prabhupada's movement, and they're looking for some help, we should give them help. It may not be the way they expect the help to be, but that's the point. That's what we should be doing. We should actually be looking for these opportunities to help increase people's understanding. That is actually what preaching is, to helping, because Krishna consciousness is actually, it is the nature of the soul. Everyone has it. It's just currently covered, right? So to whatever extent they're covered, whatever connection they actually appreciate to Krishna, then there's a little bit that's shining through of their original nature. And if we can help uncover that more, right, to make more of that, help more of that shine through, then we're actually doing a service that's pleasing to Krishna. So if we consider it, because part of our debt to serving Srila Prabhupada is preaching, because when Srila Prabhupada was talking about nonviolence, there are items of knowledge given in Bhagavad Gita, and there are several of these throughout Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. And so you have these lists of good things, qualities or traits that we should aspire to. And when Srila Prabhupada talks about nonviolence, he's not just talking about, not being physically violent toward one another, people, or even toward animals. He's talking about true nonviolence means that we understand that the nature of every living entity is servant of Krishna. All right. And every living entity, even if they're in whether they're in, no matter what kind of human form they're in, or even if they're in an animal form or trees, vegetable, whatever, uh, is striving to get back to their original position, that original consciousness. So if we have knowledge on how they can do that, but we're not sharing it, that's actually violence. So nonviolence, as Srila Prabhupada defines in those sections, is making sure that to whatever extent we can, we should be giving this Krishna consciousness to others, right? So there's various opportunities by which we can do that. People are coming from various backgrounds. And just because we may not agree with that particular background, or we may not be able to relate to it, or whatever the case may be, we can still certainly use that opportunity to not only bring whoever's approaching closer to Krishna consciousness, but it can also increase our Krishna consciousness, right? Because now we're becoming aware of something that wasn't previously something that was even on our radar, right? And so we're able to understand the importance of taking these debts seriously. Because if these so-called materialists who aren't generally interested in Krishna consciousness, but every once in a while they'll pop into the temple, right? If they're seeing value in going to the temple at this particular point in their life consistently, then we might we might start to think, oh, am I taking the debt that I have seriously enough? This person who's, they're basically most of the time engaged in sense enjoyment, but they still have this sense of duty. Do I have a sense of duty like that? Am I taking this as seriously as I should be? Right. So there's all these opportunities that we can take, not only to help others take Krishna consciousness more seriously, but to have ourselves. And that's the most important part, is that we ourselves, day by day, should be taking this more and more seriously. And as we take it more seriously, we will start to understand that there are several people, devatas, right? That we wouldn't be even able to exist where we exist if it weren't for the devatas constantly supplying all of the ingredients that we need, right? Our breathing, for example, is controlled by devatas, right? And that power, that control, is given from Krishna, of course. So, but there are so many things that we're indebted to, right? So as we become purified, we start to understand these things, but we should also understand that ultimately all of that goes back to Krishna. So if we focus on pleasing Krishna, but we actually do that, we should actually focus on pleasing Krishna, then all those debts are going to be taken care of. But that doesn't mean that we won't also, in other words, say, let's say, for example, a dear friend, devotee of ours, helped us through a very tough situation where we wouldn't have been able to get through it ourselves, and so we want to have them over for dinner and make them their favorite preparations, maybe play them kirtan from their favorite kirtanir, etc. We realize that it's not really a sufficient payment for what they did for us, but still we want to show our appreciation in whatever way. And since that's also centered around Krishna, then it's an appropriate response. That is also going to be pleasing to Krishna. When Krishna sees that his devotees are spending time always enlivening one another and conversing about me, Krishna, as he says, that makes him happy. So it's not that we should just say, all right, well, whatever, I'll just keep serving Krishna. That should be, no, we should take these opportunities to also attempt to pay these debts to these other, these devotees or even our family members, but in such a way that it's actually Krishna conscious, right? So it's increasing our Krishna consciousness, it's increasing theirs. So even if our parents are non-devotees, we should understand that uh, if it weren't for them, we wouldn't have the opportunity, actually. We wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet the devotees and to evolve our consciousness to become purified. Um, and we may argue, yeah, but somehow we would have. No, somehow we would have, but this is how we did, right? So therefore, we do have a debt, and in whatever way we can give them prasad, we can give them, we can just, converse with them about whatever aspects of God consciousness they're comfortable conversing about, etc. Right? So we should use these as opportunities, but this is the debt that we should always focus on. All other obligations that we feel we have should go through that central filter of, okay, if I feel like I'm obliged here, but I want to make sure that that obligation is going back to the original, um, that original source, right? So, did that answer that question, Prabhu? I feel like I went on a tangent.
Yes, it did. I think that explanation you gave was definitely helpful to me. Hopefully everybody else on the call. Another thing that I don't know if anybody else has a question. Maybe let's see if anybody else does. If not, I have a similar question, but a little bit different.
Go ahead.
So sometimes when a devotee, a family member leaves their body, they, I guess, go through this process and then they feel as if, I don't know, they're unclean or whatever the reason may be, and they may not either come to the temple or engage in devotional service, which when they come to the temple, they engage in devotional service during that period of time. And I actually saw this take place. We had a pujari, for instance, family member in India left their body. And then they came. I'm only bringing this up because it's a true story, and these things kind of come up as confusions. And there was another pujari that said, "You can't be here. Your mother just left her body in India. Like, you're not allowed on the altar."
Mm.
And then another devotee says, "What do you mean? He's performing, direct devotional service to the Lord. He's not considered to be contaminated. He's, this is what more purifying activity can you do than chant the holy names and, you know, dress the deity." And so sometimes we get kind of caught up in like, what's the, there's kind of the ritual, the formalities that are there, kind of karmakundic, prescriptions for us. But then we're engaged in direct devotional service. So do these things apply? And I mean, I can understand, like, if a person is like broken, mentally broken down, needs to have some space, needs to go through some grief, and like they can't perform their service because they're in the process of grieving. And therefore their consciousness of doing some devotional activity may not be so, they may need a break. But if a person feels like this is the best way for me to get through this period of time, and this is the best way for me to pay off this debt, is by continuing to engage in devotional service, it seems like there wouldn't be anything wrong with that. But I don't know what.
So I'm definitely the wrong person to ask this particular question to, because I've never done any deity worship and I haven't been trained in it. So I don't know what all of the finer points are as far as when. like I've studied Pancharatra, so I know that, you know, cleanliness and all of that, that's all is very important. I don't know enough to know uh, that. Now, what I can address, so I won't address specifically, you know, going on the altar and performing service, but I will say that, um, and I'm sorry I can't answer that part of the question. I don't have the qualification to answer that question. But in any circumstance, we do need to continue to engage in devotional service. So whether, again, going on the altar, I don't know, but engaging in some form of devotional service always should be done to whatever capacity uh, we can. Um, we should know that wherever there are guidelines that are given by Krishna, so in Shastra, that there's a reason for them, right? And so we also have to be able to understand those. Because as you mentioned, it's the consciousness that's the most important. So if, for example, we're mourning and we're not in the right mental space, then that can affect our worship. We're not so focused, right? So if we take that concept, this is where it's going to get fun. If we take that concept and we understand, then that means anytime, if we are pujaris on the altar, anytime our mindset isn't 100% pure and focused, that means we actually shouldn't be there, right? So in other words, we should take this knowledge, and instead of using it to try to say that, hey, this external thing doesn't matter, you should just do this, we should be using it to say, actually, the mindset is a very important thing, that when we purify ourselves with the water, this is where we're coming to Pancharatra. So this is in any service we're performing. We should be clean, right? And we should be focused on Krishna. So I'll give an example. If you've read Yamuna's book, when Yamuna first came and met Srila Prabhupada, she met Srila Prabhupada just as a result, a side effect of her sister was getting married. She just went to go to the wedding, right? And naturally, she wanted to help out. So she was helping Srila Prabhupada cook the wedding feast for her sister, right? And at the time, Yamuna Devi was a smoker. And so from time to time, as she's, you know, cutting vegetables and all of that, she would ask Srila Prabhupada, can I take a smoke break? And he would say, wash your hands, right? Just thinking about smoking is enough to contaminate us, right? So therefore, we should wash our hands and then also try to wash that mentality away, right? So we should take these opportunities, these discussions, to understand that if we're actually on the altar, especially if we're on the altar, but any devotional service that we're doing, we should make sure that our mindset is actually focused, because that's what devotional service means. It doesn't mean the external activity, right? It doesn't mean pushing a broom around the temple room. It means the consciousness, the mindset, right? So in all of those devotional services, we have to be pure. We have to, but then in the more direct, right, where we're actually interacting with the deity, then that's even more so important. All of those factors. So what you said, it makes sense to me. And if we were just having a discussion, and if our temple, for example, is, because there's different types of temple worship, right? Some temples, if they're just, you know, like preaching centers or home temples, then it's a different standard of worship, right? Home worship and temple worship have different standards, as we can read in these deity worship books. If our temple is one of those ones where it's the standard is it's the simpler home standard, then I would say, if you and I were having this discussion and you mentioned the same thing, I would say, yeah, no, that makes sense. So if someone is okay with it, then they should be able to perform that service if it's not going to affect their consciousness. But I can see, and again, I don't have any authority to give a definitive answer on this, but I can see how if one is following the stricter temple worship, I can see how that sort of situation could at least be worth considering. So, without answering your actual question, I hope that shed a little bit of light. Maybe someone on here knows actually the conclusive answer to that as far as actually going on the altar.
I remember on I think Narasimha Kavacha Prabhu, who is the DD ministry. I remember him saying that if you are emotionally not there, and if you're emotionally unable to perform your duties, and then you definitely shouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're emotionally okay, then there is nothing stopping you from serving the Lord.
Well, that makes sense. Acharya Prabhu, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, also what I have is also largely opinion, so for what it's worth. Although there is I wish I could remember where it is. I'm thinking maybe Nectar of Devotion, but I'm not sure where he actually says, after death in the family, a Brahmana should be like restricted for X number of days, and a Kshatriya for this number of days, and a Vaishya for a certain number of days. So me personally, I have no problem, ignoring, 90% of the smarta-ish type rules personally.
Sure.
At the same time, aside from the ritual of it, there is a kind of intelligence to it that after a death in the family, you can't pretend that people aren't going to be disturbed, people aren't going to feel grief. So, the, aside from the ritual of it, which I'm not particularly interested in, there is a kind of, psychological process that, taking a break is good. So, if God forbid, if I were like a manager and a situation like that, like he explained, I would probably say something like, well, Prabhu, there's this idea of taking some time off. Do you feel the need to do that? If you do, you're welcome to, for this number of days, that number of days, or until you feel together again and peaceful again. But I probably wouldn't enforce it. So there's a certain utility there that I think is good. So that even if I'm not interested in the ritual of it so much, I think giving the option to do it is for someone who needs it, but maybe not enforcing it because we're not overly ritualistic, might be a way to deal with it. Does that make any sense?
It makes some sense, yeah.
Okay, Hare Krishna, thank you.
Hare Krishna. Anything else? I will say, though, a lot of times, as far as the ritualistic aspects go, so in Nectar of Instruction, we learn about this concept of niyamagraha, which has two sides. One side is being too attached to the detail, which is what the smartas tend to do, and they overlook the principle. And the other thing is to just act on whim, to set aside the the uh, suggestions that are given in Shastra and think that we have a better way of serving the same purpose, right? So we do have to at least be mindful of that. And I'm just saying that I'm not saying that Acharya Prabhu or anyone else, we're not being mindful of that. I'm just saying that sometimes when we hear these things, we'll tend to develop this mentality of, yeah, this stuff isn't important at all. There is some importance there because it was compiled by Krishna. And of course, if we understand what the principle is, then yes, sometimes there can be adjustments. and that's okay if we are sticking to the principle. But if we're just sort of setting them aside because we don't relate to them, then that's not necessarily the best policy either. And again, I'm not saying that that's what Acharya Prabhu was suggesting. I'm just saying that on the whisper down the lane, that can end up being a problem, right? So Acharya Prabhu's intentions are probably right on with it. Well, if you understand the principle, then you're on. But if someone who doesn't actually understand the principle goes to make that decision, that same decision, without understanding the principle, then it can be an issue. Just like early on, when I first met the devotees, we didn't have a very good opinion about the demigods, right? Because we heard that it was an offense to treat the demigods equal to the Supreme Lord. So we actually almost had an averse feeling toward the demigods, like they don't deserve worship, but they do actually deserve worship, but as servants of Krishna, right? And so later we come to understand that, and that they're actually highly elevated souls, which is why they got the positions that they got, and we should actually respect them as devotees. So it's in other words, these things, if we understand the principle, then we're led by the correct thing. But if we do not understand the principle and we just follow the external of someone else who is actually properly following the principle, then eventually things can get completely lost. So we have to at least pay enough attention to these details that Krishna gave in these shastras to know that there's something to it. And if we can understand the principle, then yeah, if necessary, we can make some adjustment, but we also have to understand that sometimes it actually should be followed because there's something going on that we're not even aware of. And if we follow it, then eventually we may actually become aware of it, if that helps. Did you want to add anything to that, Acharya Prabhu? Is that okay? Or anyone else?
No, I'm there. Sorry. Yeah, I think that's a good explanation.
Okay, thank you.
Anyway, I'm not going to defend myself. I think you expressed it very well. Thank you.
Oh,
Hare Krishna.
Okay. Anything else? All righty. Then we can stop here. Thank you very much for joining. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Kuti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Jai. Kripasindu Vyevacha.
Uttanam
Pavanevyo Vaishnavevyo